want to say I saw like a YouTube short or something of Tyson Fury talking about his opinion on another heavyweight boxer. I want to say maybe it was Alexander Usyk or something like that. And he was talking about how, I don't know if it was I'm not really sure on the specifics. It could have been an interview before a fight or something, and he was like, "Yes, I know I'm going to beat him. I know I could beat him, but I still respect him as a man." And he used a term to describe Usyk that was interesting. He said, "I respect him as he's another God-fearing man." And then I thought, where's that from? The idea of he's a God-fearing man. And then I remembered there's this line um, in the Bible that I'm probably paraphrasing, where it basically said like, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." And I was like, okay, number one, is that true? And number two, if it is true, why? Why is it true? And I think that day I messaged you and I said, "Why do you think fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom?" And then once I've paused with my bit here, I'm interested to see if anything came to you from that. What I found through my own speculation and bit of research into what some scholars had said about this is that the fear of the Lord in this Bible passage is the fear that comes from awe and from reverence and from the romantic poets, your sort of William Wordsworth's, your what's his name, Lord Byron, and what's the kid one that did Negative Capability, John Keats. That's it. These kind of characters, they had this concept of the sublime, which was like a force of nature that was so beautiful it was terrifying. Like if you come into contact with a mountain, it brings about great and powerful emotions in you because of its magnitude and its beauty and its grandiosity. That it's kind of it draws you in, but you're also afraid of it, right? And the fear of the Lord in this Bible passage is that kind of fear. And the analogy that someone wrote, I think it was on some article I read. I'll try and find it to put in the show notes, but they wrote about this fear being the same way you fear the ocean, because we love the ocean as a beautiful thing. We like going to the seaside. I mean, it's a massive part of my childhood because I was brought up by the sea. We love the smell of the sea air, all that kind of stuff. But the ocean also has the capacity to destroy your home in a tsunami and kill you and drown you, and has rip currents that can absolutely destroy your life. And it's this kind of love but reverence for the capacity that that force of nature has. That's the same fear that we have of the Lord in this Bible quote. And now, so that's the first bit, this idea of fearing the Lord. The second bit is, why is it the beginning of wisdom? And this makes sense to me, right? Because if you fear the Lord as this kind of, he is the creator, or that it is the force that generated the whole universe, the ultimate good in the universe. If you fear it but have the right amount of humility, it makes you recognize your like smallness, your insufficiency, your insignificance as a little human being. Like the difference between you and your little ego to the power of whatever created this universe or whatever's possessing and animating this universe. The difference between that is a massive call to humility and to recognize the the gap between you and the divine. And with humility in that, you can then recognize this this difference that you have and try and rectify it, and rectify where we miss the mark. If we think of like a concept of God not as a person, or a person, a guy with a white beard in the sky wearing sandals, if we think of it as just the ideal human being, whether that's any prophet from a particular religion or whatever, just like the top of the hierarchy of what it means to be a good being in this world. Fearing that and seeing the gap between where we are now to that is a call to find wisdom. Seeing where you miss the mark is the beginning of trying to rectify that gap. Now, I don't know if I've made complete sense of that, because obviously it was like 2 weeks ago when I was thinking about this, but yeah, what do you have any questions, and what do you think?
I want to firstly address the connection between fear of the Lord and wisdom. And I think what came to mind for me was this idea of the wise man knows that he knows nothing.
Mm,
And there's something existential about that. There's something, the only person that essentially knows is the creator, is God. And I think that's a part of it. And part of fearing the Lord is knowing that you know nothing.
Mm,
And I found that like a very clear distinction that we can make. The other thing I think my initial thoughts that would come to mind with what is this concept about fearing the Lord? And I think it's a bit obvious, but it's gonna be that our actions have consequences and that there's a potential to be put in a judgment day
yeah.
where we then go to hell. And what does that if we're aware of that, then what does that kind of mean? And perhaps we perhaps when you have that, you start that's kind of the call to awakening, that's the call to, like, calculating and moving about the world a bit differently
Well,
because,
well, I think if you decide to adopt a religious way of living, no matter what that is, I'm not talking about any specific religion here. If you decide to live as if there is a a creator, a good force in the universe, a judging force, a moral force. I mean, you're kind of agreeing that there is a road you should be walking in life. And as soon as you do that, there's a whole lot of responsibility on you to walk that path, and you're not always going to get it right. And so you will fear, as soon as you accept that there's a right way of being, an ultimately spiritually good way of being, then you will fear missing the mark. You will fear the judgment of that force. You'll fear the consequences. I like that. Yeah.
when you really, like, conceptualize there's a possibility of going to hell, like, it really it is something so scary that you're, like, you're so frightened or I so I've been thinking and I've thought about that before of, like, shit, when I die, is there a possibility of going to hell? And it's like, please, I really don't, I really, really don't want that. So
Well, we
I
can
need,
we can either use this idea with not like hell being a physical place we go to in the afterlife, just thinking about hell symbolically, right? You fear the the descent into hell on earth. Like as soon as you realize that there is a way that the devil can possess you and there are sins that you can follow, and if you follow them, your life slowly breaks down into hatred and bitterness. That's a scary thing. I mean, it's the same way that like even striving for any good, there is a fear that you will miss the mark and fall down. That I think that's a big part of it. Just the fear of the moral responsibility, because if there's a chance I could join the kingdom of heaven and be at one with God or at one with the universal consciousness or whatever, then you're scared that you'll get missed out in that way, or you'll make a fundamental mistake that means that everyone leaves you behind at the end of the world, or I don't know. We're sounding a bit very, very sort of religious here, but I'm not meaning to. I'm trying to draw out what's the functional utility of an idea like that, because I think we do all fear God in the same way that we fear the ocean, or the same way that we fear a mountain. There are things bigger than us, and when we come to terms with the biggerness of other things, it makes our ego look small. And that gap between what we are and what's around us is the beginning of wisdom, because it shows us our insufficiencies. And I think you're really right when you say the wise man is wise because he knows nothing. It's like in comparison to what created this universe, we know zero things. And so the road to wisdom is just trying to be like that force, trying to emulate it, trying to follow what is trying to guide us to do.
I think it's similar to the question, should you fear death?
Yes.
Because, and if you do, then perhaps you're less likely to die, and therefore it's a helpful idea. With similar to me fearing hell, an example could be when I walk past the same homeless people every day, that I'm therefore like have that. There's a little like glimpse that I get like shunned in the face from someone who's in hell, And that glimpse, I guess it's a motivating and a thought for gratitude where you don't want to end up like that. So you do everything to not end up like that.
Mm.
And I feel we can take these big concepts of hell and death, and we may not realize it, but unconsciously we're aiming against those things every single day. It's a weird one of should you fear death, because I think there's a lot of people that perhaps don't, and they would say no to that question because they wouldn't like fearing anything and being that conscious of any of these big like ideas. They'd maybe see as an anxiety that you shouldn't burden yourself with. And I understand that point of view. And I'm not too sure on the answer there. I think I'd have to read more up on it.
Well, final thing before we pivot to both of our big points for today is this. Maybe also the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom because it calls you back to humility. And we've been talking. We talked a bit last week about pride and about ego and how that's the largest sin because it can hide behind other virtues or perceived virtues. And um, if you fear the creator of the universe, right, the ultimate being, no matter what you do in this life, no matter who you become, you can always be brought back to humility because you will never reach the mark of that being, of that thing. So, for example, you can be the most powerful person in the human world, the richest person, the best heavyweight boxer, the richest CEO, the best person at archery or snooker or dart, or whatever. You can rise up any particular hierarchy, and if you still have a fear of God in the back of your mind, then you can always come back to humility because everything that you were given in the first place, the raw skills or the raw materials to become that person and have that power and rise up that hierarchy is because of the creator anyway. Like even anything that me and you have done in our lives, we still were blessed to do it by the forces that brought us into this universe, that gave us this mind and this body and gave us these parents and this circumstance and the cards we were dealt in life. And so if you keep an idea of where everything has come from and who's really in charge, I guess, you could never live up to that. And so you can always remain humble because there's always something bigger than you. If you get to the top of your game in something, you can feel like you are the top of life. But no, the wise man knows that he's never the top of life because there's so much more to know. And you can never know as much as the creator and as the orchestrating force that animates this universe. I don't know, it's sounding all woo-woo, but do you know what I mean? Like I think something I drew a lot from these conversations about pride that we had and about evil that we had actually is that maybe one of the biggest antidotes is humility and staying
Hmm.
grounded in yourself.
I think this is there's a I think this is what makes man conquering nature so appealing. These, for example, things like skydiving to sort of this space tourism industry that we're developing to even, I guess, just like I don't know. I haven't done jet skiing, but maybe that's a part of it. These things that man can do that we've invented that has a more that has it it allows us to encounter nature in a way that's in our favor. Because when you go skydiving or you go up into space, you you have kind of destroyed that. You've shattered that like door of humility because you now are looking at the world and you've like gone a step closer. Like you've almost jumped another bit of reality where like you you're looking at the creation, the earth, and you're a man. You're just a little. You're a little man, and you're looking at the whole earth,
Mm.
and that's the bad. And I feel like we're maybe almost not supposed to do that because I think there's a pretty like high there's people that go up in this space. I think these astronauts. I think there's quite high depression rates because they can't reach that high again. I think. Um, uh, uh, I listened to something recently about that, and but however, like I get it. Like skydiving is pretty awesome. Um, so that would be, yeah, that just came to mind as the way to kind of break break this thing of humility where maybe we're not fearing God as much. And I think this kind of thrill seeking it is kind of like against the fear of God, right? Because you're literally like, okay, you're that is it is because you're so like you're not fearing death anymore either. You're literally like you're risking your life a tiny bit to have a massive great experience.
Yeah, I mean, skydiving is a massive fuck you against gravity and against the inevitability of dying if you fell from that normal height anyway, and sort of an overcoming of nature by human technological advancement. Um, it's an interesting point you've added there. Should we move on?
Yeah, let's do it. I'll go. So I think this episode is going to be like decently like theological heavy. Um, so I I was thinking been thinking a lot about happiness and kind of the religious take on it. And there's this one question from Jesus that like fucked my understanding of reality. Uh, Basically, in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus asks a deeper question or a deeper version of the chicken and the egg. And he Jesus asked, did the body come from the spirit or did the spirit come from the body? And then he says something pretty profound. He says, I'm amazed how great wealth has come from, ha- has made its home in such poverty. And he essentially he attaches poverty to the body. And I think that's because the body decays as we get older, it
Nice.
sort of weakens.
Mm.
Yeah. And it is also susceptible to injury. So it's a fragile thing. However, the spirit is wealthy and it exceeds the boundary of the body.
It's infinite.
Um, yeah, it transcends any kind of material.
Mm.
So my answer to Jesus' question, I don't think it matters too much. I think both have weight to it, both sides of the chicken and the egg. But I think the thing that I want us to remember from that little segment is that the body is poverty. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Mm.
Now, maybe I was also thinking of counter argument of maybe we can work out and we can strengthen our body and that can equal a strong mind. But the body still has its limits.
That's what I
So
wanted to jump in and say. Yeah, the way I'm seeing what you're saying here is because poverty has financial implications in today's world, but I see that as the body has limitations. Like you can make it as
mhm.
strong as you want in the gym or be as healthy as you want in your kind of diet and lifestyle or whatever, but eventually you will die. Like your body is mortal, whereas the spirit is infinite and it is beyond limitation. It transcends limitation. Carry on.
Yeah. So if we keep that idea and we then start to think about happiness, I I've been thinking about this a lot, and because the idea of happiness has always had it's been such it's almost a too broad a concept that it can mean too many different things that I've never really had a big grip on. I've never really dived into the philosophy of it because you can think of happiness as pleasure, you can think about it as laughter, you can think about it as joy, but you can also think about it as eudaimonia, which is Aristotle talks about it in the context of this longer lasting sort of fulfillment.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't point to massively anything specific. And I think that's an issue because if you ask the average uni student the meaning of life, they're going to say happiness, but they don't know what they're pointing to. And so I actually I took a lot of inspiration from Riyadh, which I want to credit. I want to make sure I credit because he separated happiness into lower happiness and higher happiness. So lower happiness is specifically of the body, happiness of just the body. So that's things like alcohol, sex, lust, vanity. And higher happiness is of the mind, which is things like wisdom, courage, creativity, knowledge, charity, virtue, things like that. And I think there is this really cool thing about the really interesting definition of how do we decide about how like happy someone is, um, how much happiness they have, and I think this definition is really cool. So so the opposite would be sadness, and sadness is essentially all sadness is the perceived lack of options. The important word that's perceived. So let's say your cat dies and you have a massively low perceived amount of options because you can't bring it back to life. You can get a new cat, but you're not thinking about getting a new cat. So at that time, that's why you're sad because there's no other option. You can't bring it back to life and you don't want to replace it. And there's this, I don't know who said it, but there's this idea of a massacre where every single option, every single way you turn is is a bad outcome to it. That's when you're like really stuck in hell, where everywhere you look is a dragon and you can't really make anything right. Um, and in the same way that's sadness is a lack of perceived amount of options, happiness is an abundance of options. So when I apply this to higher happiness and lower happiness, you can have an abundance of higher happiness, which is like if you've ever had those moments where I know one for me would be after that Angelo interview where not only are you happy because you've just done something that you're proud of, but you get eye into the future where you know you now have this proof and you visualize these like grand things that you're now capable of that you're excited for in the future. It's like an abundance of things that you know it's abundance of like courage and knowledge that you now have bringing in, that you now have access to in the future. But you can also have an abundance of options in a lower happiness because you can have loads of vanity, but then and you know that there's more coming, and you get people like that as well. So they're the kind of the two things that I think man wrestles with. And I've I've kind of spoke about this before, but uh, that why should you pick high happiness over low happiness? Why should you pick the mind over the body when I don't think actually that many people do? And I won't list loads of reasons because I have spoken about them before, but I list a couple. So, firstly, when the mind learns something, they never regret it, but you regret alcohol, you regret sex, etc. Was one reason, and like when you think about it, have you ever we've never really had a podcast conversation that we regret. You don't really regret like being kind. You don't regret being virtuous, but you will regret those
Vices.
the drinking too much and saying something stupid.
Mm.
Yeah. Secondly, there's this thing of you always have your mind is something that you can contemplate with whenever you don't always have food or sex like accessible. Like you can only have like I don't know 4,000 calories a day before you burst. Um, for those for those people that are addicted to food, but your mind is this thing that you carry around with you whenever you want, all the time, and you always have access to kindness. You always have access to wisdom. It's this thing of it always being with you. It's an investment, you know. And the last point is that the body will abandon you at some point, and if you identify your happiness with your body, then you'll suffer for when your body decays. But if you identify your happiness with knowledge, creativity, it never leaves you. So I guess in other words, the devil abandons you, but God doesn't.
Mm.
There are lots of more reasons, but I'll leave it at just three because I think I have spoke about them before. Uh, and I think I actually might pause there before I go on for the last bit
Yeah.
um,
So
to get
yeah,
your thoughts.
I like this a lot. So if we see the body, let's say the realm of the body is the realm of limitation, and the realm of the spirit or the mind, I'm using those terms synonymously, is the realm of the infinite that transcends limitation. And therefore, the happiness of the body will be fading always because of the limitation. You will not have infinite happiness in the body. That's not possible. Whereas the happiness of the spirit is persistent happiness, um, that transcends the limitations of the body and persists across long periods of time. And like you said, with things of courage and wisdom and learning, today is good because you did that, but you also know that you can use that wisdom to, and it'll pay dividends later down the line in the future. I think that's something we actually talked about in the Angelo episode, that maybe the difference between pleasure and happiness that comes from wisdom is that you kind of, there's a residual happiness effect for the rest of your life if you hold on to that piece of wisdom. Um, it's not going to make the next day worse. In fact, it probably make it better in comparison to sort of bodily pleasures that, the hangover effect of whatever it is, that feeling of regret, like you mentioned. Um, and this idea that, yeah, you always have yourself with yourself. You always have your mind with you forever. And so that's the asset that you have to invest in. It's an appreciating asset. I think that's something that Chris Williamson said. The mind is an appreciating asset and the body is a depreciating asset. Eventually that limitation will take over, and whatever position you got your body into, it will fade. Whereas as long as you keep your cognitive wits about you and, avoid the disasters of dementia and cognitive decline and stuff, your consciousness is always with you. And so the quality, that the texture of your mind is the most important metric in your life, I believe. Um, and I think that this stuff makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I like it. Carry on.
Well, I should have probably said that s- the, the amount that someone is spiritually healthy is the amount that they pick their happiness with the mind over the body. I think that's a very good definition for spiritual health. How much do they how much where do they put their happiness?
Yeah, where do
Because
they draw the happiness from?
yeah, um when you do this and you do put the you do focus on your mind. Um what Jesus says is whoever has come to understand the world finds a corpse, and whoever has found the corpse is superior to the world, which I think means when you kind of invest in your mind and you awaken yourself like that, you see through the social gains. The corpse basically kind of symbolizing things that are now dead, which I think are the social games, the ego, the power, the desire. Uh, and I think actually, yeah, with the corpse, I think it symbolizes that looks real but has no life, things that don't last essentially. And my kind of solution to conclude is I I think that this is a battle between everyone, but
You mean within everyone?
within everyone, yeah. And I think just like the way that my old sales manager used to say, it's not about when you it's not about losing your attitude, it's about how fast you can get it back.
Yeah.
I think the similar things apply here with it's not about it's not about like these thoughts of vanity and like the devil's going to try and whisper you. It's hard to like not have any kind of whispering at all.
No.
Um, you're going to encounter vanity and ego. Ego pops into your head, and you might have your like little like your little like 10 minutes of like boom, like big ego moments. But then like after those 10 minutes are done, can you quickly get it back and associate your happiness back to the mind and go back to humility? I think that's the best way to approach it. It's not about losing. It's not about blocking out and not ever like the ego is gonna inevitably appear and grow big, but it's about how quick can you be humble and squash it back down.
Yeah.
Essentially, I think that's a decent solution.
Well, we're all going to fall prey to the body and to vices from time to time. You know, we're all going to, even little mundane things like you're not going to be as optimal with your meal prep one week. So you're going to be really hungry when you're driving home, and you are going to drive past McDonald's drive through and you're probably going to go there. Right. Or you are going to have your lustful moments. You're going to have your egoic moments because you're a human, you're a creature. That there is a creaturely part of you that has a lot of control. That's where your primal instincts come from, you know? That if anything, that's the foundation of you. Um, but like you said, it's important that you every single time you fall into that world, you recognize it and you rectify it. And that's why, Jacob, spirituality and religiosity or whatever, morality is not just a switch that's flicked one day where suddenly you're following that path forever. That's why spirituality in its nature is a practice. It's about your meditation practice or your yoga practice or your stillness practice that is designed to return you back to the world of the spirit and the world of the mind and observe the body as a thing that is not you, as a thing that you use, just like the same way that a sailor drives a boat, but it's not the boat. Um, and, you know, the boat may be swayed by the tide, but ultimately, as long as you're a, you know, you're a competent sailor, you can weather those storms in a sense. Um, and yeah, that's the spiritual path is this the falling off, but it's the return. You know, we're not perfect. We're not godlike. We're triers. You know, we're warriors in a sense. And I think this idea that the fight between lower and higher happinesses within each individual is true, and you see it in our society. I mean, it's just yeah,
Mm,
a lot of what we talked about the individualism and the egoism in our society last week. It's in the same way I feel like lower happiness, bodily happiness is what's advertised to us. It's what we're promoted to follow and promoted to seek.
mm. I think that's a good point. That as long as you are human, you're going to have bodily happiness, temptations. It's a part of being human,
Mm.
uh, and that's what makes being a human quite interesting. So, yeah, I think that's probably a good place to leave it. Because I like I think that the idea's enough to like make me understand the way that I think happiness is. Um, but yeah, tell me about knowing myself.
Yeah, so I'm gonna do the usual kind of Joel structure of a point where I'm gonna go into a bit of an anecdote about life recently, then dig into what it made me think about, then dig into sort of what I researched around the topic, and then what we've concluded, and kind of try and finish with some kind of practical point. Um, so from time to time, at university, I have these like sport, personal development, lifestyle workshops where it's run by this great lady. We get on really well, and it's all about it's basically self work. It's dressed up to be for improving athletes' performance and mental health, but it's literally self work. It's like journaling and self reflection. And like so, for example, our session this week was about athlete personal branding and what that means and what your brand is and how you would like to build it or what resonates with you when you think about that concept and stuff like this, right? And every time I go to these sessions, I have the same realization. And I don't want this to come across like I'm being condescending because I'm really not. I think it's a really interesting observation that tells us something about human nature. And that is how difficult people find it to talk about themselves. Now, maybe it's because I'm a narcissist or something, or because I've had this podcast and because I write so much and I've journaled for 2,000 days. But for me, it's doable. I can I can make a mind map about how I see my personal brand and talk about it in a group of small people, pretty much fine. Maybe my heart rate goes up a little bit, but it's not like, I'm not stressed about it. But so many people in these sessions, they clearly don't do this stuff because it's not part of their lifestyle. They're not as like weird as me, and they find it really difficult. They either struggle to come up with things, ways to describe their internal experience, or when they do, it's like they're put on a spot and everyone's watching them and they shake, and it's like there's a spotlight in front of them and there's all this pressure to be vulnerable, and it's just it surely, I mean, the point that I drew when I was thinking about it is surely it should be so much easier than it seems, because you are you, so you should be able to talk about you, but that's not how it works. We are opaque to ourselves. We cannot see what we really are. We cannot really describe it too easily. Maybe for two reasons. One, because we can't know, and two, because it's terrifying. Because talking about yourself is completely exposing yourself to others, and we like to live behind these personas and these masks, to kind of just fit in and make things easier. Anyway, so that was the sort of anecdote from this week, and I wanted to think about this idea more deeply of why are we opaque to ourselves? Why do we not have self knowledge? Um, why do we not really know who we are and what we want? Like, why is that not self-evident? Because surely it should be, because we are us, right? Um anyway, I was trying to pick apart, firstly, why we should be talking about this in the first place. Why do we need to know ourselves? Because I think the gist of most athletes' responses to this kind of self work is like, how is this going to make me a better athlete? How's it going to make me a better basketball player or whatever? But actually, I think it may give you some performance advantage. But why knowing yourself is so useful is it actually makes you able to be present in your journey as an athlete or as a person like striving towards high performance. If you know yourself and you're connected with yourself and why you're doing the things you do and what motivates you, um, then you can actually enjoy the moment when it comes. I mean, you hear so many athletes that got to the top of their game in something, but they couldn't even be present or enjoy it when they got there. Connecting with yourself is being able to be part of the journey, be present with it, and do it for the right reasons. Um, and also another interesting thing is that we don't live like this, like opacity, which is like not being able to see yourself clearly. We don't live like that's the case. Like when I talk to you and you tell me what you think and what you believe, I think you know that outrightly. Like I think that your opinions are so solidly grounded because you know exactly what you think. But that's not actually true. People are all just kind of bullshitting and figuring it out as we go along. So that's another interesting strand to it. Anyway, and then I came across this essay by Francie Russell, who's I want to say a professor at a university in America. And it came up with some interesting points. Um, they wrote about how knowing oneself is actually more about taking responsibility for your own mind rather than actually knowing it. So like there's a mystery within you always of why do I think the things I do? Why do I feel the things the way I do? But knowing yourself is not about having a set of facts of why you are the way you are, but it's actually about taking responsibility of doing the best with what you've got and trying to make yourself feel better and think better and believe more accurately and find the truth. And I question here, maybe that's the beginning of the road to sort of self-love without ego, just to really accept the parts of yourself you don't know and do the best you can and be responsible for the parts that you can control. Then, which is what I'm going to finish with before I pause. This idea from D.H. Lawrence came up, who's like an English novelist, and I've got this quote here on me and Jacob's shared notes page here, where he says that we are a paradox in that we are self-knowing and self-opaque at the same time. And in this quote, he describes the mind like a dark forest, and the parts of yourself that you know are just like a clearing in the forest. And he writes that strange gods come forth from the forest into the clearing of my known self and then go back, and that you must have the courage to let them come and go. Now, what this means to me is like there's an essential distinction we need to make that knowing oneself may be impossible, but knowing of the mystery in you, that there are parts of you know and you don't know, you have to take responsibility for that and understand that you have a conscious mind and you have an unconscious, and both together is what forms who you are. And rather than saying like, oh, rather than really trying to like understand the facts of you, you have to accept that you are a unique thing that even you have to come to terms with. Like self-work is a lifelong process. It's not just something we're going to get from like a workshop or something. And then my final point, I guess, was hubris. I don't know if you've heard of this word before. It basically just means like a lot of so much pride that you think there's no need for learning anymore. Like you think you've got it. That's the strongest barricade between us and self-knowledge. Like already thinking you know yourself is like the biggest wall between that. I don't know if I've been super coherent in that
Mm.
because I was going through all this yesterday, but yeah. I mean, how to what extent do you think you know yourself, and do you think you should, and if so, how?
Um, that last bit from hubris, that's kind of like he who thinks like the journey is done is the one that's truly lost.
Yeah,
It's a
hubris
similar
is
thing
the
there.
term. So hubris is the word. It's like it's kind of the opposite to humility. Let me Google it for you. It's a characteristic. Yeah, excessive pride or self-confidence. Actually, in Greek tragedy, it's a Greek term. It meant excessive pride, or that leads us to defy the gods, leading to thinking we already know what they can tell us. Kind of like ego that makes us ignorant. If someone has hubris, does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think to truly diagnose this problem, so you're there with a bunch of athletes. The lecturer, the lady asks, "Can you give a little bit of a story about yourself and who Joel is as a personal brand?" And because we're all walking personal brands, and
Mm.
you kind of say your bit because you do these practices and you're more self aware and you practice this stuff, and then everyone else in the room just had like not really much to say or really struggled to say what it is that kind of makes them feel alive.
And I feel like an asshole, right? Because like I'll give some like I built some fucking like Jungian diagram of like this is myself and this is my ego and this is my personal
Good
brand,
to you.
overlaps of the ego. Do you know what I mean? And then I don't know. I feel a bit dirty because it sounds like, oh, look at this fucking guy that thinks he knows himself. But I find it interesting that if I have to do that, right? If I don't do that, my mental health goes in the bin. I'm a very analytical, like inclined person, especially when it comes to myself and my own mind. I'm always trying to seek to understand things and put it in a model and have an explanation. So I need to do that. It's one of my copes. It's one of my defense mechanisms. And so I found it interesting that people don't have that. And actually I think we should live in a world where we can talk about ourselves. I mean, the lady that runs the workshop, she's fantastic at it, but that's her job because she's just practiced it. But
Mhm.
yeah, carry on.
What was the room like when you did the onion diagram about yourself?
Well, it's just I think that people are nice. Do you know what I mean? I'm not it's me projecting my own insecurities if I'm saying that like they probably think I'm an asshole because I'm thinking I'm an asshole. Um, yeah, they're just a bit I don't know, a bit shocked to some degree
Mhm.
sometimes. But then some of them in there like some of them were my teammates, so they know that I'm a bit weird like that.
Yeah. Okay, okay. This is quite similar, I think, to I think this strikes absurdism pretty well, in that knowing yourself and meaning kind of go together, and along that is like what you believe. So I think what Camus would say is that it's not that life necessarily is meaningless, but life starts off as meaningless, which I think is a pretty accurate thing. And essentially if you don't find this mystery inside of you, you don't go on a self-improvement journey, perhaps it can just stay meaningless. And I think that's perhaps the situation that some of these athletes recognize they're in that moment, because they haven't maybe found that mystery within them properly. So I think Camus pretty appropriate to apply here. I also think this represents a lot of people that yeah, this represents a lot of people in the UK that like this character. There's this character from Dostoyevsky's Demons called Stravagin. I think that's what he's called. Which I think he represents most people from the UK. And he is this. He's the perfect kind of like absurd thing, like Cammy was talking about, where if he was extravagant, if he, let's say he gets like a little glimpse of like meaning, there's a little thing that pops into his head that could be belief into something a bit bigger. There's an opportunity there for something meaningful. And what is said in Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus was, um, if he believes, he does not think he believes. If he does not believe, he does not think, he does not believe. Essentially, he immediately distances himself from any kind of opportunity for meaning or belief. That's what the absurd man does. He doesn't look inward, and he doesn't take a position on this sort of thing. I think that's the kind of there's an opportunity for some people that they could people get a glimpse for. It's hard to go through your life and not have anything that grips you, not have any sort of thing that's eternal that really makes you feel alive, that could give you meaning. But when that happens, the absurd man distances himself from it. They didn't give it any power. They didn't stick with it. They didn't move it inward. They didn't journal about it. And that's what I think. All that I think that's literally what happened. What's happened to these athletes is they've they've just distanced themselves and they've not done the work to attribute, because they have a lot of meaning, right? They could do that. They're like a very successful athlete, but perhaps, and I think this is true because you would be able to form a personal brand around it in this context because you have your sort of you're the own character and you're playing the game and you're building a character around yourself. So I think this does overlap with the idea of meaning a little bit.
Well, yeah, I think you're
Uh,
right. Two things. One is, I don't think it's these people's fault because the world we live in today doesn't even consider self-work to even really be a thing. Like, if it was something we were taught in schools from young, I feel like it would be a massive difference. And I also have friends and teammates who, just the way that they're wired, that kind of self-work workshop doesn't do anything for them. It's fatiguing mentally. That it's just they don't like talking about feelings and emotions and stuff, and they just want to play. And for them, that's fine. Like, that works for you or doesn't work for you. Both are fine. But for me, I struggle to comprehend it because of the way that I'm wired, that it doesn't land with them. Um, and it makes what you were saying about the answers to the meaning problem is inside you. I think is really true. And because of my inclinations and things I've learned and things I've read, I'm going to feel that way, aren't I? But I feel like, I mean, even so, I started looking into myself more deeply in like the first lockdown when I was like 15, 16. And at that time, I didn't even know I liked psychology. I didn't even know that I wanted to do anything like what we're doing now. I just wanted to play Fortnite. Like, I just wanted to get through the school day to go and play PlayStation. But I took the time to think about what I really wanted in my life for hours and hours and listened to great thinkers and started reading stuff that then put together a picture of what was a meaningful life for me. And then I've kind of began to start building it. But if I hadn't done that time really looking, I wouldn't have found those answers. And the more I looked outside of myself, the more I was led astray, the more that Fortnite seemed a desirable thing to spend my time doing. And I think a lot of people are stuck in that these days. And it makes me think about, Jung's profound quote where he said, those look outside dream and those look inside awaken. The answer to your personal meaning crisis is in you. But in you is an abyss, it's a void that you don't really, it's not a clear project that you can figure out. It's just something you have to fumble in the dark doing for maybe a long, long time before you realize it.
mm. I think there was also a point that maybe like it's an interesting question in this context. Does everyone need a personal brand? Does everyone need to look inward? And I'm not. I mean, Camus would say that he would he would argue no. Um, these absurd people that I think absurdism isn't too bad of a philosophy because you know that life is meaningless, but like you're cool with it, like, and you're like you. Camus would use this Don Juan archetype, and he would kind of illustrate this kind of acting and this like this way of being that's you're maybe you are an actor. You don't you're not your true self. You're an actor, but that's okay. But like you have an extreme commitment to just like the game, the actions, but you also understand the meaningless of the actions. So I feel like some of these athletes, it could be a bit like that, where they just want to play the game. You know, they just want to play basketball, and they
Well,
know it's.
I think I have to go through all these rabbit holes of self-work and read up on the depth psychology and the philosophy and go into theology and question my relationship with God and what I think of scripture and all this kind of shit, just to come
Mhm.
back to the same place that a lot of them are at, where it's like it's not that deep. I just want to play. And I have to go through that rabbit hole to come back to where they started anyway. Um, and maybe there's some truth to that because it's just the way I'm wired. But at least I'm enjoying that path while I'm on it. And yeah, people are different, man. People are different, and I think that's what makes me realize as well. Like, yeah, it's the way my mind is wired is to always look deeply, always. And I can't go back and just pretend like I don't think these things. I couldn't just sit there and pretend I don't want to say anything. I have to follow it. But that's what makes us all different, which is good, I guess.
Yeah. uh, yeah, I think that's a good place to end. I think that's the right conclusion to go to, that we are different, and there's people that that workshop doesn't. That people won't necessarily. They will go through their life and they won't know that is themselves, and maybe that's okay.
Yeah, because
So,
if they're happy and they contribute positively to the community, they find love, they find contentment, then you've completed the game of life.
mm,
You don't need to know the theory. Sometimes you can just complete the game.
it's just that we're cursed with this, but so are the people listening. So,
Yeah, hopefully. If our message lands, I guess you have to be that kind of way.
yeah. Okay, I think this is a good place to leave, because leave this conversation here. 'Cause I didn't bring too much today,
Neither
and
did I, but it's okay. We got another rep in the tank. I don't know if I was super coherent today, but like I say, another rep, another day of chopping wood, carrying water, and we'll be back next time with a guest, I think.
cool. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed this one, and thanks for listening.